that's joined already. If you've never joined one of our detection dispatch sessions, welcome. This is our bi-weekly live series where we bring in some of our internal subject matter experts. And we have a variety of workshops, fireside chats, Q&As, just like general talks about all things detection engineering. And we have a lot of hands-on sessions. But we're super happy to have you guys here. Today we have an awesome session with Tim Frazier and Eric Hines. We're bringing Tim back from his first session, and if you haven't joined that one, you're in for a treat. Eric's awesome too, so it's going to be a really great time. But I'm going to pass it off to them and let them kick it off.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks, Jeanette. Appreciate that. And welcome everybody to today's edition of Detection Dispatch, which is our educational offering to the detection engineering community, where we provide content and a forum for discussion. If anybody wants to jump in and ask questions, that's why we do it via this Zoom format. So you can jump off mute and ask a question or type it into the chat, whatever you're comfortable with. So today, just for your awareness, separately from Detection Dispatch, we've created a few videos on YouTube covering some basics of detection engineering, talked a little bit about MITRE ATT&CK and some threat research. So we're going to continue in that same vein. Today, we're going to talk about building detections on this edition of the Dispatch, and I brought a special guest in who builds detections every day. So my guest today is a U.S. Navy veteran, and he's still in the reserves, so thank you for your service. He is a fellow Chattanooga, Tennessee resident, like myself, and he leads our threat detection engineering team at Anvilogic, which is responsible for creating, publishing, and updating all of our detection content that we provide. So with that detection content, one thing that's important to note is that we have a specific way of building our detections here at Envilogic, and we'll talk about that some and why we do it the way we do it. We're going to be clear about general best practices versus our specifics in an effort to help all of you level up in your detection engineering. So Eric, with that introduction, first off, thanks for joining me today and taking some time to talk about what you do for detection engineering. Kind of as a way to start things off and get warmed up here, can you give us the quick version of how you got into this field and detection engineering specifically?
Yeah, easy. So thanks for that warm intro. Appreciate it. Yeah, so essentially the way I got into cyber, I guess, as a whole, was in the military, and they told me I couldn't do my job anymore and I had to find another one or get out. So luckily, I saw a bunch of articles. Cyber warfare was like, I don't know, a big thing that was going on at the time. So I saw a couple articles, threw in some interest to that, transferred to the cyber branch in the Navy, and haven't looked back since 2012 is when I officially launched that career. So I've been in different forms of cyber since then, like offensive, defensive type stuff. So that's kind of what piqued my interest, and I get to learn a bunch of different stuff every day, which is great. Get to rehash a bunch of old stuff still too, which is also good. But it's been a lot of fun since I've done it. So that's what really got me into the whole field and why I keep doing it.
Yeah, no, I definitely resonate with that myself and can identify with learning new things, right? I think that's one of the commonalities that we all in cyber, really have, is that the thing never changes, right? Or, I'm sorry, it never stays the same. The only constant is change. And so we're always having to learn new things. We're always having to keep up, and it keeps things varied, right? Which makes it interesting. So all right, let's dive right in. First question that I think we can start with is prioritizing detections. How do you prioritize which detections to work on here at Anvilogic? And then how would you prioritize detections if you were working in-house for a large enterprise, for example? In the past, we've talked a bit about starting with MITRE ATT&CK and also about using threat research. But let's get specific here. Maybe what was a pretty recent detection that you built, and why did you focus on that one versus any other detection?
Yeah, so for way we prioritize our content here is usually customer requests. They're concerned about something. We take a look at it, see what we can do, and if we don't already have it in the armory, we look at how we could build that out for them, to provide that for them. And the next, based off that, is intelligence based, right? So we want to see what's out there, what's trending, what's going on, what new threats are being used, or what old threats are still being used commonly, the most. Do we have enough detections around them, and build from there? And then when we first started, it was all about that MITRE, right? Like, let's make sure we can get MITRE coverage across the board. So larger organizations in a mature SOC, that would be like where you're at, right? What are you covering for MITRE? And then after that, it would be, hey, what's intelligence that's based off my organization, in the industry that I should be looking at, and then what's trending for those various threat groups, as well. So, and then for a brand new organization that's not really that mature, MITRE is a great framework to really just take a look at and see how you could do things, to get like a base of coverage, and then you can start developing more based off that intelligence that's, specific to your industry.
Okay, so let's talk a specific one then. If based on those priorities, it sounds like we encounter obviously requests from customers, and then we do our own threat research and we pull all those things together. But what's one we can showcase today that we can start diving into here
Very
and
much
kind of
so.
yeah, break down the process for me. Like, what are the steps that you go through as you do this? So
Yeah,
that'll be
absolutely. So basic intel, right? So this is basically a breakdown that Cigna wrote. So we go over it. So the way I first do is our intel team will take a look, see what's there, see what we might have or might not have in the armory. So then I take a deep dive into the things that we need to look at as far as what's there, right? So this is basically what they're talking about. So we'll not deep dive too much into the article, but UAC bypass, right? So user account control bypass is really what we were looking at. So how did they leverage this technique? They're using FOD helper, which is, I think, features on demand is what that is, usually for language and stuff like that for Windows. So we were looking at how could they leverage that. So first thing I do is take a look at the intelligence that's available, right? So obviously we see that they're modifying these register keys to be able to use FOD helper in a malicious way. So then it's like deep dive into the article, what else is there, and then might come up with different detections off that, but we'll focus on just this one here.
So I just wanted to interject there. I think it's important to call out, right? When we're talking about intelligence, it is an example here of this article that somebody has published, which includes, the TTPs, right? Kind of in that first paragraph there that you have on the screen, it says we're seeing an update in the threat actors TTPs, which is so important that we treat this as the intelligence that we care about and we look for, rather than a lot of people refer to simple IOCs like domain names and hashes and all those things as threat intelligence. And oftentimes those detections that are written around those things can be very time limited, and those things change frequently. So when we're talking about intelligence, we're really focused on TTPs, which we're getting at here. And you kind of have to use that analyst mindset to extract the relevant things, right? Where you're saying, hey, these are the registry keys that we care about. Here's the executable that they're using to do that. And so then the next steps, I won't get ahead of ourselves here, but that's just some key points I want to call out as we do this. So what's next?
Absolutely. So next is more research again. So I do more research on how FOD helper could be used for bypass, and then I take a look at other things as well. Like, hey, is there any POCs or something that's available that kind of shows me how this may or may not be done? So this is like the Atomics Red Team that has various behavior-based style signatures that you can look at to try to come up with stuff. And then I also go to MITRE. Hey, where have I seen this before? Or have you seen this before? That gives me ideas on how to create detections. So based off just this article and this atomic, I know the one things that I'm really looking at is I want to see registry add. I want to see this shell open command registry key, and I want to see FOD helper in some way. So the next thing I would do would be to basically look at that.
So you're just jumping right in based on that information. You're jumping right into starting out your search in your lab environment, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and for anybody who's not aware, Atomic Red Team, great open source project, example attack techniques, right? Example procedures of how somebody would employ a technique from the MITRE attack framework. It's all organized by the tactics and techniques. So super helpful project if you're not familiar.
And then obviously, I'll take a look. This lets me get a baseline judge on how loud this may or not be. Like if I'm getting a lot of results in a lab environment, then I already have to look at how I might have to fine tune this for some of our customers. But here we see we're not really getting anything. So then I'm like, okay, cool. I'll just copy and paste, the atomic real quick. And I like to do that in a batch file. So I can show you how I do that. Let me get my controls back.
Yeah. And so again, to kind of unpack this a little bit step by step, right, is doing a search in the environment first. What he's talking about is trying to establish if there's any of that baseline activity, if that is already going on, right? Is FOD helper something that maybe I have an automation script that's doing in my environment, right? I'm working at some enterprise and the IT team is using FOD helper to do something, right? I don't know. They probably not, but they might be. So if you see that, right, and all of a sudden you get all these hits for it, then you're like, maybe I either need to allow this something or I need to come up with a different way to do the detection, right? So just to kind of break that piece down, is there's a lot of those things that Eric's kind of doing by second nature that are happening really fast. And then what he's getting ready to do here, right, is actually execute some of these things on a host in the lab so that we can actually see what that looks like, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So to make atomics, it's so much easier just to run it in a batch script rather than trying to like one line each and every single one. So what I would do, basically just get sure it's there. So then all I have to do is run the atomics batch file.
Brandon, it looks like
And
you raising your hand. You might have a question. Sorry, Eric, don't want to interrupt, but
go
go for
ahead.
it, Brandon.
Yeah, I did have a question. So Tim, you kind of mentioned, from like a tuning perspective, the noise in the environment when you start to build a detection like this. Before Eric gets ready to jump into the next step for tuning, approach-wise, kind of methodology-wise, would you advise tuning based on technical indicators, based on what it is that you're looking for, or getting a better understanding of some of the behavioral indicators for tuning, right? Like what an adversary might do next, and building the detection that way.
Yeah, so I'll take a stab at it, and then I'll let you fill in the details too, Eric. But what I would say is, right, if you start to see a lot of this activity in your environment, right, you can still get value by go ahead and run an example like he's doing here on a lab box, and then compare what does it look like when I'm doing something from an atomic team that is an example of what an adversary might do versus what is happening in my environment ordinarily, right? And try to pull out the distinction and figure out what you can do. Is it is there a different parent process, right? Is there some sort of distinction that you can make from a way an adversary might use a living off the land binary versus the way your IT team is using it, right? So that's kind of my take on what I would do, is try to start digging into a level deeper if I see a lot of the activity already. To try to determine what I can key in on, right? Maybe it's a certain command line parameter, a switch, right? An option that's being added in the benign case versus the adversarial case, and vice versa. So that's my thought on it, Eric. What do you got?
Yeah, and I would also just add, like, am I seeing this on multiple hosts, right? Maybe I can look at counting the hosts that have this process or this pace. Is if it's a scheduled job that's running a PowerShell script or something to do something for the admin team, is that occurring at a specific time? All right, cool. Then I can add that to my allow list potentially. I'm a big opponent of allow listing. If I'm picking an allow list, I'm picking something that's very specific, right? I'm talking like parent process path and a process path to be able to do that, and even a potential command line. And obviously, I'm spoiled at Anvilogic that I get to look and get these as events of interest rather than trying to get an alert style detection built from every single one of these. Now, obviously, we try to get as many as we can that are that level, but not every single detection, especially for behaviorals, is going to be something that you can have as an alert to let your SOC analyst try to figure out one way or the other.
Yeah, I think that's a real important point. I want to expound on that when you mention events of interest, right? And the way we write our detections. So again, this is one of those specific things that we do at Anvilogic. When we're writing these behavioral detections, we naturally want to be a little more encompassing for the detection. And what that means is we know there's going to be some quote unquote false positives, right? Or some benign activity that we end up catching with that. And the reason for that is we're generating events of interest from those that we then use for a next level of detection called scenarios, right? So it's a little bit about a detection framework rather than just trying to go straight from raw data to an alert, right? Because to Eric's point, if you need to write that alert style detection, then you're going to have to do a lot of allow listing, right? You're going to end up with this huge long list of hosts or IP addresses or things in your environment where you know that this is benign. But what we're saying is that's okay in our style, because we're looking for that behavior followed by another behavior or another set of behaviors. And so we're doing a behavioral style detection first to identify every time that happens, and then we can link those things together later. So that was just a quick aside about some of the ways that we write it, which is a little bit more general than you would want to if you're trying to create a specific alert from this. So enough of the awesome. Thanks for the feedback, Brandon. Hopefully that's helpful. And now back to what you're doing here, Eric.
I was going to say, did that answer your question, Brandon, or do we need to go?
Nope. Perfect. Thank you.
Good. Awesome. So we'll just jump back. So this is what we were talking about earlier. Seeing the 4688 event, the expected FOD helper. We expected something to see as far as FOD helper goes, seen it as the parent process launching command.exe. So my first detection would be, hey, what's FOD helper as a parent process name look like, right? So I could deep dive into that. I don't see that very often. Great. I'll just keep that as that one. If I see a lot, like if we wanted to tune this further, all right, cool. Then I would change the name of the use case and it would be FOD helper launching suspicious executables. We shouldn't be seeing it launch, something from system 32. So that would be one way that you could tune this down to get rid of some of your other fake noise, especially when it's command.exe, PowerShell, things of that nature.
Yeah. So just to clarify a couple things there, 4688 is the event ID, right? Is Windows event logs process creation event, right? For
Correct.
anybody that wasn't aware of that. So we're talking about a new process creation. We're talking about FOD helper as the parent process, because that, again, if we go back to that research in the blog, that was what they were saying is they were using to launch the command shell that they were then going to execute follow-on commands. So if we're looking for that FOD helper as the parent process, Eric was saying, hey, that may just be rare in and of itself, right? And we could just key off of that if we're not seeing it in our environment. Or if we're saying, hey, we do see FOD helper some from time to time, maybe we need to get more specific and look for those specific sub processes that are being launched and as a matter of concern. Is that a fair summary, Eric?
That's a very fair summary. Just like I said, we're kind of gaming it. So Sysmon event ID 1 is the same thing as 4688 for Windows. So I have both Sysmon and Windows events here, and we'll get into why that is a little bit later. But hey, we expected to see reg add. Here's our reg add. So now we know, okay, cool. There would be another detection. Let me see when registry has added to this shell open command, because as we saw it in other areas, right? So this is event viewer. So this is another UAC bypass, but with event viewer modifying the same registry key. So just having that note, okay, cool. So this wouldn't necessarily be FOD helper specific, but this would be a UAC bypass specific for registry additions for this one command. So that would be the next use case. Let me see when registry has added to this registry key. And I would go with the shell open command, just because if we go back, you never know what might be the leader, precursor, and the hive. But we do know that shell open command is what we want to look at. And that would give you a broader detection to see, hey, you would catch event viewer or FOD helper now with this one detection if it was there. And then we're going to go to the next one. Copy that.
Yeah, so we're moving fast, right? But this is the key part, is he's looking for those commonalities and those things that you're going to key in off of to really make a good detection. That's saying that shell open command registry key, kind of that ending point, can have multiple keys in different parts of the registry hive that could be used for malicious purposes.
Fine. So this is what I was looking for. So the reason I have Sysmon and Windows Event up is because I wanted to highlight one other thing that we could look at is Event ID 13, which is Sysmon's additions to registry keys, modifications to registry keys. This would let you look at specific registry keys if you wanted to. So that's be one other detection that I could look at doing, is just looking for this. All right, cool. But how does that impact me for Windows? Well, this highlights one thing, right? If you want to look at registry keys in Windows, you have to have additional auditing on to be able to find that Windows event. If you don't have that auditing, you're not going to find it. So that's why I had Sysmon and Windows events there. As you could see, before this was here, all we had was 4688 events. So what's one way I could look at this as another way as a detection, right? So we talked about regadd, and this. We talked about FOD helper and this. But what if they rename reg.exe to mx.exe instead of reg.exe? That would break this detection. So the next thing that I would do, instead of even looking at Sysmon events, would be, hey, let me just look at this being in the process command line, right? So now if somebody did a PowerShell /c new item, adding to the registry key, or if they renamed reg.exe to mx.exe or something like that, I'm still going to be able to find this as a process command line argument. And that's going to be an event of interest that I want to look at. So that would be a suspicious mention of a registry key that we know is used as a UAC bypass. And that's what I would look at there. And then that's where your tuning would be. Let me look at how many hosts do I see that on? When do I see that on? How often am I seeing that? And that would allow you to give that fine tune. So you could look at, using an event stats or a stats to be able to calculate some of that stuff, at least in Splunk, for that piece. So that's kind of how that would work. And I would build out those detections there for that piece.
Yeah, I think you hit on something that was a good important point there that I want to reemphasize was, adversaries renaming things, right? When you think about somebody using registry or reg add or something like that, that's assuming that the binary stays the same name. They could easily make a copy of it, right, and rename it something else. And if your detection is simply looking for that name in your command line, it could be easily missed, right? We call that a brittle detection, right? If there's things that the adversary can easily do to break it. But Eric's point about the registry key itself, that can't change, right? The shell/open/command, they're going to have to put their, execution that they want to do in that specific registry key. So that's always going to be there, right? They can't rename that and still get this bypass to work. So it's about identifying, a lot of detection engineering is about identifying those pieces that can't be obfuscated or can't be changed or can't be, worked around from an adversary perspective. And so that's just a really important part of the mindset of detection engineering that I just want to call out, that Eric he's just like a ninja, man. He's doing this by second nature all the time. So I love it. Keep it going.
So, I mean, and that's then the next step for me would be going into our platform and then creating the use case. So now that I've identified 3 separate use cases just off this one piece of intelligence, I would then go into our platform and doing that. And so I'm just going to briefly go into it and kind of show some things that are important and why. And that way we're not specifically talking about Anvilogic, the product, but really why it's important, right? So now I can give it a title. I can spell, I can't. And then I can list what type of detection is this, right? Do I know that this is a signature-based detection? I don't. I'm going off of behavior, right? I'm expecting the behavior to be file helper.exe as the parent process, and then I can specify, hey, the domain. So now I can do that. I can give a description, all the bad stuff, for that piece. But then I can add additional details. Like I can specify a category like hacking. And this is where people should also try to look at doing stuff is I can add references. So now I can take my intelligence article and I can add this reference. So in the future, if I'm gone and somebody else needs to look at, or a customer needs to look at where the basis of this detection was, it's there, right? So they know where that source came from, that source material. Kill chain phase, I can add that there. Actions on
Yeah. To re-emphasize the why you're doing this, right? This may not be like the hardcore detailed part of detection engineering, but this is so important to have this associated metadata, right? Because for whoever comes after you, like Eric said, not only on the detection engineering side, but whoever's seeing the output of this from an analyst side, right? If you don't have any good information in here, if you're like, I'm just going to write a rule and save it and say bad rule, then people are not going to be happy with you. Okay. Like the reality is they're going to look at this and be like, why did he even write this? What was he thinking? What am I supposed to do with this? Right. I can't tell you how many times I've looked at rules in the sim that have come out and somebody's like, what are we going to do? I don't know what we're going to do with this. This doesn't even make sense. What are we trying to see here? So by putting all this metadata, the related references, the description, that type of stuff, take the time to do this when you're writing rules, because this is where, it can really mean the difference of, okay, I know what to do with this versus, okay, great, I'll just mark it as acknowledged and move on, right? So just had to add that in there.
Yeah, and it helps with the like the detection engineers versus the SOC analysts type stuff, if people have experienced that. This gives the SOC analysts like, oh, this is where the thought process was behind this detection vice. Those stupid detection engineers, what are they doing? Type stuff. But then also, the next step would be mapping it to MITRE. Luckily, we already looked at that. So it'd be, trying to find what that MITRE is, right? So privilege escalation, bypassing user account control. So then, this just gets fed in from MITRE, the exploits that are associated with this, the threat groups, Windows platform is the victim platform here. Then I can give it an impact. Like, how impactful is this going to be? Well, this is behavioral style detection. Probably not going to be as crazy as far as noise goes. So I'll assign it as a medium impact, just because really they have to do something extra. They already have to have access to do this. So it's not going to be a crazy initial. This is just kind of the format of the way our rules look. We use a lot of macros for everything, and we nest a lot of different stuff. So I would be putting the input macros for this piece. This is for a Splunk search. We use these initial get macros to basically specify this is where the index and the source type should be. And then we use this map macro to basically format it to our Anvilogic data model to give us those extra enrichment that we put previously. And then the next part then is subdomain, right? Windows. This lets me do that. And then I can set different types of modes, right? If this is a test rule still that I'm working on, I can set it to test. I can try it out in RSOC, see how it looks there. By default, if it's a threat identifier that's behavioral, we put it in warn mode. Alerts are our alerts. Those are always going to be our threat scenarios. But if we have a signature-based rule, that would also be an alert. Severity, we can assign medium here. It's, different things. It's not a critical. It's not really a low. Confidence, for now, we can put medium, and then we can base that on other things, right? So this also lets me do different things like specify, hey, what am I looking at? Here, I'm looking at Windows event logs. Well, if it was event ID 1, I'd be looking at sysmon, and that's important to be able to specify what your data category is and where that feed is coming from so that you know what that rule is looking for. If I wanted to put different, what a sample looked like. So if I wanted to throw that in here, I could throw this in here. So now when somebody's looking at my rule, they see what that true positive is that I was writing the initial rule for. Gives the analyst additional information. And the next step is really important, I think, is next steps, right? So what do I do with this alert now that it's come, or what do I do with this warn signal, right? And I can say, something like, verify. So step 1, hey, verify this activity was expected. Was I expecting to see that activity there or not? If not, then, next step, would be to correlate different events of interest on that same host or that same user. This lets me do different things. I can escalate different things that can be there as far as that piece goes. And that's really how we build out all of our detections for that piece.
Yeah, and so I think we just showed how Eric does it, right, using Anvilogic platform, but whatever you do to associate metadata with it, right? You might have a Confluence page, you might have a wiki, you might have, something that you're doing to put that there. The idea is that, you want analysts to be able to access that, right? So that when that rule fires, they can have those next steps, they can have that associated metadata, they can see this in the bigger picture. And so, that's one of the things we try to do is make that easier for that to be included. So I guess now, Eric, that you got that created, right? What do you do for updates or changes to that, right? Like, how would you manage that?
Yeah, so that's easy. So that's the best part about the platform. I'll just go ahead and save this so we can deep dive a little bit. So we use insights as well to help find out and tune rules based off other customers, right? So any customer that's using our insights platform, I get feedback based off that to see, hey, is this noisy or is this not noisy on across all of the organizations? Like, oh, wow, this seems to be relatively loud. All right, let's deep dive into that. Why? How can we tune that piece out? Is that an allow list, or is that something that we need to go back into the rule and look at, like we're not including something specific? So we'll go back and test it, and then I can update the rule here. And then we have versioning of the rules, which is also really important. So like if I make a change, like I can specify what the change was that I made. You'll be able to see that in the history of the rule. So we could kind of do that real quick, but I don't want to really highlight Anvilogic as a platform, but
Yeah.
That's kind of how we look at it. We get those insights, and then also we relook at different things, right? Different stuff comes out, like a new report might come out a year and a half from now that is also using the same UAC bypass as FOD helper, right? Hey, we look at this. Are we missing something on this threat report? Or are we not missing something on this threat report? And then we reevaluate the rules based off that and rerun the executions and go from there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that, back to the kind of whether it's brittleness of rules or what have you, right? Using behavioral detections, we can make those adjustments to it, and they're not something that changes all the time, right? But there may be, every 6 months or a year, some sort of technique change or procedure change so that we can have that adjustment. And yeah, to your point, right, we do that through our platform, but I think there is an aspect where, however you're doing it, you want to make sure that you're able to track those changes, that there's a history, that you could do some sort of a rollback, because version control and that type of thing is a challenge. And especially with the idea of detection as code becoming more and more popular,
Exactly.
right? Thinking about those things as kind of doing those regression tests and making sure that it's still working as expected. So,
and the why too behind it, like why was this change made? Like,
yeah,
like you can see changes have made, but not knowing the whys, like kind of like looking at an allow list, like that somebody made, like why did they make that? Why did they make that?
Well, thanks so much, Eric. Man, really appreciate you breaking that down for us. That was super helpful. Just in case anybody feels like he went too fast, there will be a recording of this, so you can go back and watch it later, right, and kind of zoom in on some of those pieces. But man, a lot of information jam packed in here in the 30 minutes that we did this. So thanks so much, Eric. I think Jeanette, back to you for kind of close out here.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, guys. We'll be following up with you guys an email with the detection code that we always give away every single session. And if you don't get it through email, you can always get it on the landing page. And like Tim said, All of our episodes are on demand at Anvilogic/workshop, but also our YouTube channel has a lot of our episodes and all of Tim's security snippets where he walks through stuff. He brings in some other people from Anvilogic as well and gets a lot of different perspectives on detection engineering in general. So it's a great series to tune into. But if you're part of the series and you're coming every 2 weeks, we have an awesome session in 2 weeks with Michael Hart from Anvilogic. He's our principal data scientist, and he's going to be doing a really awesome session on scaling really large data loads with Snowflake and using AI and all that good stuff. So stay tuned. But if there are no other questions and you don't want to drop them in chat, we'll follow up with you guys. You can ask questions in thread. If you have any technical questions, Tim and Eric can definitely answer. Getting tongue-tied here. Over emails.
I want you to answer the technical question, Jeanette. Come on, let's have some fun with this.
I can answer any demand gen question for you with a security spin on
kidding.
it, but that's about it.
No,
awesome.
yeah, I've always wanted to know how to do AI in cybersecurity, so I'm looking forward to the session with Mike Hart coming up in 2 weeks. So
he's
smart
dude. Smart dude.
Yep. Yes.
Yeah. And for anybody else here as well, like if you guys just want to share the Zoom link or share the invite with anybody internally at your company or other colleagues that you have that are in the security space, feel free to do it. It's super easy to sign up. You only sign up once and you're always part of the series. You can always catch us on demand or here. So yeah, thanks everybody. Hope you have a great rest of your day. See you guys.
Thank y'all.